Good evening. The opinions and statements voiced by our guests do not necessarily reflect the opinions of this network. Enjoy the shows.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk only on Paranormal Experience Radio. Broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
And welcome to the Full Spectrum Project. I am one of your hosts, Brian Clune, and I am joined by...
Hi, this is Pete Haviland in the great state of Texas.
And I'm going to apologize for Pete now. And we're also joined by Angie Mole, who will be here with our Weird World News segment. Say hello, Angie.
Good evening, y'all.
We slow down. Every week we slow it down. Weird World News.
Yeah, well, the reason I slow it down is because if I don't slow it down, it'll be the Weird World News or something to that effect. And everybody will be going, wait, what did he say?
I just consider your inside voice is coming out again, and I love that.
No, trust me, if my inside voice was coming out, I would be doing exactly what Angie made me do just before the show, and I would start drooling all over the place because I was trying to think. And that's just not a pretty sight. It just doesn't work.
I think that's the medication that you're on, and I think you're getting too much, or maybe not enough.
Well, I actually did go to the doctor a couple days ago because, I broke my knee a few years ago, and it's actually been bugging me. And the doctor now says I have arthritis in my knee, and it's like, oh, great. I just had my hip replaced a couple years ago because of arthritis. Now I may have to have my knee replaced because of arthritis. But here's the worst part. So I had something else I wanted to talk to him about, and I think we all go through this as we get a little bit older. You start to shrink, okay? And I was asking him if there was any way... I
want to apologize to everybody listening right now for the information that's being passed.
Look, it's true. We tend to as we get older, right? So I asked the doctor, hey, is there something we can do to prevent shrinkage? And I really wasn't very happy with the answer.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's a rock and a string.
Yeah, you know what? Just quiet on that one. So he told me, he goes, well, you're going to have to wait for the diagnosis. And I'm like, look, doc, I really don't want to wait. He goes, look, you're just going to have to be a little patient. And that was it. It was like, told me I was. It was just.
Whoa, wait a second. We waited for that payoff.
What payoff? I was telling you the truth,
dude. You're fired. I'll just ask Troy if he wants to come in and start doing co-host.
Well, once again, I've been afraid to say anything because here we are. So,
to be perfectly honest with you,
Troy comes in swinging. Oh man.
To be perfectly honest with you, when you told me that Troy had actually agreed to come back on the show, I was like,
yeah, you were surprised,
wow,
weren't you?
I really was.
We were surprised.
And I was like, geez.
I'm like, I don't know if Troy's going to take my phone calls anymore. I'm a little worried.
Glutton for punishment, really.
Yeah.
Apparently. Well, I will tell you what, because you did come back, you're now one of my favorite guests. So there is that.
I'm the only one who's ever come back, so...
yeah. Every once in a while I have to hire a bounty hunter to get him on a microphone.
Yeah, I just keep wondering why I keep getting blocked on Facebook from all of our guests. I have not been able to figure that out yet.
It has to do with the pictures you send them, dude. I keep telling you that.
Well, I mean, I keep sending them pictures of Richard Nixon, and they keep going, why are you sending me dick pics? So it's just one of those things that
Okay, and there's $100 fine right there.
You do know what Richard's nickname is, right? I mean,
yeah.
All right. So
It's the content. It's the content that I'll be paying for the next 2 months.
yeah. Well, as I was saying that, I realized that by saying that it was a little bit of a trick question. So I said it anyway.
And
anyway,
I thought you closed the book on him. I thought we took his book away.
Yeah, but he still has internet access. Can't do anything about that.
Scary, isn't it?
Spotty.
Yes.
Oh, incidentally, to all of our listeners right now that are listening to us just going off and on, Troy Taylor's our guest this evening. And he's going to be discussing different curses. And he has a whole list that he's provided to us for this evening. And it's going to be a great show.
Well, we talked about it. And so here we are.
Yeah. And I was going to say that for those of our listeners who haven't figured it out yet, our guest tonight is Troy Taylor. And Troy, seriously though, we are definitely thrilled to have you back.
I'm only kidding. So.
We know, but I mean, your knowledge of certain things is just unmatched. So we really do appreciate you coming on.
Just certain things. He's got a wide variety of stuff he knows about. I mean, it's not even paranormal. Cryptids and missing people and you name it. Either Troy has a book on it, or he could tell you about it. The man has awesome knowledge.
Right, just a wealth of information.
Yes.
All right, so to kick it off, in one of the ones that I wanted to talk about was The Curse of Little Bastard. All right, so in 1955, James Dean bought a Porsche 550 Spider, and while driving up to a car rally, I believe it was in Salinas, he was struck and killed along with his passenger. Now, the thing I found so interesting about this is 5 days earlier, his friend Alec Guinness, he was showing Guinness, and for those of you who may not know,
I was going to say, doesn't that mess with your mind to know that James Dean and Obi-Wan Kenobi were friends?
Exactly. I was just going to say, for those who might not be familiar with the name Alec Guinness, I'm sure they know the name Obi-Wan Kenobi. And in typical Obi-Wan fashion, as soon as Alec Guinness looked at the Porsche Spider, he told James Dean that it gave off a sinister appearance, and then went on to say that if you get in that car, you will be found dead in it by this time next week. And that's exactly what happened. Now, my question on that, and I'm not really familiar with Alec Guinness other than his acting career, I was wondering, is there any thought of him possibly, having a precognitive ability, or can curses actually manifest a feeling towards certain people who might be open to it?
Is this a question for me?
This is a question for you. Yes.
Okay. Well, here's my thing. We've got this list of curses that we want to talk about, that I mentioned to Pete that would be fun to talk about tonight, including this one. And it is fascinating, but in my long study of this kind of thing between movies and music and everything else, when it comes to curses, they tend to be what we make of them. In other words, the only person that we have as evidence that Alec Guinness said that you'd be dead in a week is him retelling this story after James Dean died. Okay? So we have to take all of this stuff with a grain of salt, because I think that and not to be a downer here on a show when we want to talk about the paranormal, but a lot of the stuff that I had mentioned that I wanted to talk about are all things that I think that we tend to create curses on our own, so to speak. You can either make something into a curse by talking about it afterward, or, if we go back to the idea of, what curses often are, they are a form of what we like to call sympathetic magic. In other words, curses, or, whether they be, an old curse that someone puts on someone, a voodoo curse, whatever, they only work if you believe they work. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do.
So if you believe in a curse, then everything bad that happens to you, you're going to believe is part of that curse. In other words, when someone says something, let's say that I said, you know what, Brian, you've really pissed me off tonight, and you're gonna get in a wreck on your way to work tomorrow. And
Okay,
if you
I
really
promise
thought
I'll
I
stop
was
the dad
serious,
jokes.
what's that?
I said, I promise I'll stop the dad jokes.
No, I'm just kidding. But I'm just
I know.
just as an example, obviously. Let's just say that for whatever reason you believe that I had the ability to put a curse on you, and you stewed about it all night. And when you got ready to drive to work the next morning, you're going to be extra cautious and extra concerned about the fact that something bad might happen to you. And the more you think about it, the more you're going to manifest it happening. And I think that in this particular case, the curse of the James Dean death car, which we haven't even gotten into the details yet. So I don't want to spoil anything because it's an interesting story. But I'm pretty sure I know who cooked this story up. And so when you start tying everything into the story, it makes it seem real. It essentially it makes it come true. And so I don't believe that Alec Guinness had any kind of precognitive, vision or anything. Everything that we know about what he said about the little bastard, this car James Dean was in a car was crazy. He had a desperate need for speed. He was really reckless. He had a lot of stuff going on in his personal life that made him very self-destructive. I mean, you can to see how he died, all you got to have to do really is delve into his life and see all the things that he dealt with, the things he'd done in his career, the way things were going for him. And, really, he was on his way up, but he was a very self-destructive person, but he loved racing and he loved driving fast, and he bought cars and things for the sole purpose of seeing how fast he could go. And when he, took off on this particular trip through the desert, they were running at speeds at 120, 140 miles an hour because they were wide open on desert highway, and it was a fluke. A kid ended up in his lane. Everything that happened was a fluke. I don't think it was a curse. I think it was the fact that he was driving so dangerously and so fast that there was no way to avoid the accident that happened. And so anything that Alec Guinness said to him before, because I think that probably he wasn't the only one who said to him, dude, you're gonna die in this car. You've literally bought a race car. I've seen a replica of this car. I didn't get to drive it. I'm not sure I would have wanted to or ride in it, but I did see a replica of this car. And it was purely built to be a race car. It wasn't meant to be driving around on the streets of LA. It was meant to hit the racetrack. And Dean knew that. That's why he bought it. And so they were running on open highway in the desert, as fast as they could possibly go. And, it led to his death. And I got to say that he probably saw it coming. I think a lot of his friends did. And you can build that up and give it an ominous feeling of, oh, everybody warned him. I think they've been warning him for a couple of years at this point that he was going to end up dead behind the wheel of one of these cars that he was driving.
Yeah, and I do remember that there were a lot of people that were telling him that he was going to end up dead if he didn't slow down.
Yeah, yeah.
But I guess, he was just, the thrill of the speed, I guess.
Yeah, well, it was live fast and leave a good looking corpse. That was one of his quotes. There's all kinds of photos I've seen of him posing in coffins and stuff. This guy never expected to live very long. He really didn't. I'm not saying that he wanted to die. I just think he figured it was coming one of these days,
Well, one of the things that
wasn't there stories, or maybe it was just hearsay, that the car came to him as so-called cursed? That the car itself had history.
Yeah, again, that's one of those things that, has popped up afterward. But, I
Okay.
got to say that I think that I really think that some of the stuff that, has come into this story is a
Mhm.
lot of stuff that's been fed into it to make it spookier than it really
Okay.
is. I mean, don't get me
Okay.
wrong. The story has a bit of an odd ending to it, but a
Mhm.
lot of the stuff that has been built into it is for publicity reasons. I'll be honest with you. A lot of this stuff ends up that way. I mean, it doesn't mean that
More,
there's not odd things happening, but
right. More of an urban legend than anything else.
sure, yeah, a lot of it is, and I mean,
Okay.
not all of it, but a lot of it is. You're right.
Okay, well, getting to the urban legend, one of the things that I found interesting, and I'm not really sure how many of the stories are true, to be perfectly honest with you, and that's why I kind of wanted to ask you about them,
Sure.
is when George Barris bought the wreck of Little Bastard. A lot of things after that were said to have happened. And I want to put it that way because, like I said,
Mhm.
I'm not sure of the reality of any of them. Okay.
Well,
Well, I mean, I
is
can walk you through it.
Barris, is that the one that made the Munster Mobile and the
Yes,
Batmobile? Okay.
yes,
All
yes.
right.
Same
Yeah,
guy, George
same guy.
Barris.
Now, supposedly, one of the first things that happened was that the car itself slid off the trailer and broke a mechanic's leg. Then they sold the engine to two racers, and basically within the same day, in the same race, it killed both of the people who, one who was in the car that actually had the engine from Little Bastard in it, and then his partner missed a turn and he flipped and died in the same race. There was supposedly two tires
can I
that
stop?
were.
Can I stop you? Can I stop you right there? The engine itself, the accident that he died in, was the engine even usable?
Yeah,
It was.
yeah, it was a
It
lot of
was?
it was.
Okay. I didn't know.
Yeah, only the frame was damaged beyond repair. The parts in it
Okay.
were actually used. After the wreck, there was a doctor who was also a racer, William Esrich, and he had competed against James Dean in several races. And he took a lot of the mechanical parts out of the car, and then he sold the frame to George Barris, who wanted to rebuild it, but the frame was too damaged. So he ended up kind of like welding some pieces of it together to stabilize it, and then he put it into a traveling exhibit. And he started loaning it out to different places, museums and things. The National Safety Council wanted it to use for a local car show, and then they were putting it on display in different places as, James Dean's last car, to kind of warn people against, high speeds and, just like a safety thing. And then it was on its way to Florida in a locked semi-trailer. And by the time it got to Florida, the trailer was empty. And no one could explain what happened to it. Now, my problem with this story is that I have a feeling that because most of the stories of the bad things that happen to the parts that were in all the cars all came from one source, and that source was George Barris. Now, he was the one who had been putting it on display. He was the one who sent it to Florida or allegedly put it in this locked trailer, and then it vanished. And then a few years later, in I think like 1974, Barris put out a book about like cars he'd done, like the Batmobile and, the Munsters car, Dragula and all that stuff. And he's the one that's when the story got started. It wasn't back in the 50s. There were no stories about curses or anything for like 20 years after James Dean died. It wasn't until this book came out that Barris had done that he started talking about all the accidents that were supposed to have happened with drivers who'd used parts of the car. Dr. Esrich, that first guy, had been involved. He was using the engine out of the car, and then he was in an accident. And Barris claimed that another driver who was all in the same race, also using parts from James Dean's car, lost control of his car and ran into a tree. Estridge had an accident, and then there were all of these other accidents. I mean, there was a fire that was supposed to have taken place around a car that had a bunch of the parts from James Dean's car in it, that burned down a garage that was all supposed to be linked to it. Two of the tires burned out. It burned out parts of the car, and then no one, of course, could explain how it had happened. And that's actually even when the story started about Alec Guinness. That was in that book. It wasn't anything that went around before that. It was all in that book. And, to this day, the car is supposed to be missing. I mean, it's never been found. In 2005, there's a museum here in Illinois, up north in Vollo, Illinois, and there's an auto museum there, and they offered $1 billion for the car.
Troy, yeah. I'm sorry, I need to cut you off real quick because we do have to take a station identification break. Well, I'm sorry about that.
No. I did this last time too. Don't worry about it.
Okay, thanks.
You wind me up and let me go, and that's what happens.
Hey, you know what? That's one of the reasons we love having you on. Believe me. So we're going to take a quick station identification break, and when we come back, we'll continue talking with Troy Taylor about Little Bastard. That just sounds so weird.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... Nope. That'll do. Hello. I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk only on Paranormal Experience Radio. Broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama. Since 1948, Fate Magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting. You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
This is Jason Bland, host of Midwest Paranormal Presents Paranormal Soup, where we stream live as a webcast every Sunday night, 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. Eastern, with guests who will blow your mind. Live ghost box sessions where you can call into the show to see if the spirits will talk to you, and the World Wide Web of Weird with the latest in paranormal news and evidence. We're bringing the weird every Sunday night, 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. Eastern on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. Don't forget to follow and subscribe.
Thank you for listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 23 minutes after the hour.
And welcome back to the Full Spectrum Project on WBHM-DB out of Birmingham, Alabama. If you haven't joined the chat room already, please go to WBHM-DB.com, click on the Full Spectrum Project show banner, and that will take you to the chat room. And if you have any questions for our guest or for your host, please call to area code 205-533-7982. So Troy, when we left for the break, you were talking about the disappearance of the car and how you think it may have just been Barris himself who had created the so-called curse as a way for self-promotion.
Yeah, I have to wonder about it. I can't help but wonder about it just because he's, nobody ever heard any of these stories until he's the one who started telling them. I mean, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think he's just generating, it's showbiz, I get it. Yeah. I understand it. I just wonder if that it's not a big part of it. Because like I was talking about the auto museum, and they offered $1 million for the car, and it never turned up. It still hasn't turned up. But then in 2015, there was a guy who came forward who claimed that when he was a kid, that he and his dad and another man had hid the car, the James Dean car, behind a false wall in a building in Washington State. He remembered some of it. He passed a polygraph test about this, but he would not reveal the location until he was promised at least a portion of the reward that was being offered by this. Yeah. So to this day, it's never been, offered because the auto museum says they're only going to pay when they take legal possession of the car. And since nobody knows where the hell it is or who owns it, and it's all based on the story of a guy who's retelling a story from when he was 6 years old. We don't have any idea where it is. I will tell you that that Dr. Esridge, his family, they still have the engine to the car, and there's a Porsche collector in Massachusetts that has some more parts of the car, and they haven't ever reported any kind of misfortune because of having it. So, the car technically is missing. And to me, that's the coolest part of the story, I guess, because I like that whole, lost ark, element to the story. But other than that, it's a cool story. It's a great car story, and what's more American than a car story,
based off of that, Troy, Troy, what would be your thoughts on the end game of it being being missing, or even if that 6-year-old was correct that it was behind a wall? Why hide it all these years?
Well, the thing about that is that, I don't think, Barris put it on the truck, but I think he would have, if he still had it, he would have revealed it by now. I don't think, I think that's the reason behind the stories that he publicized, about the curse and stuff. This isn't a guy who goes around, dealing in, the paranormal or anything, but it's such a great story because everybody knew that James Dean was destined to die in a car. It was everybody who knew him knew that. It was just kind of a given. And so I think he added to the story. He added an element of, mystery to the story, but I don't think he has it. I think he created the curse, the so-called curse, but I don't think he had the car. Somebody else had it. And if I had to guess, now this is just a guess, but if I had to guess, I'd say that whoever had it put it away thinking that they would do something with it someday and died. That's what I think. So it's probably sitting in a warehouse. I'm not even convinced it's behind a wall somewhere. I think it's what's left of it, that frame, because all it is the frame. All the parts have already been scavenged out of it. All that's left is the frame, and, the shell of the car, and it was mangled. Really torn up when the accident happened. So, it was just, it was a thin metal car. It was very lightweight because it had to be. It was a race car. And so it's really torn up. And I think somebody put it in storage somewhere and thought, I'll hang on to this thing because it's going to be worth something someday. And it's probably still sitting somewhere, honestly. Or the people who have it don't even know what they have.
One of the thoughts that was going through my mind is is I was wondering if maybe the car had gotten, or the frame had gotten stolen, and Barris, thinking he'd probably never be able to recover it, decided, you know what, I'm going to come up with
Absolutely.
this whole elaborate story,
Absolutely.
so I can continue to make money on
Exactly.
James
Yeah, I,
Dean's
I I
car.
totally think that. Yeah, I totally
What
believe
about
that.
and, and what about maybe even having pieced it out to private collectors to make cash on it? It doesn't exist anymore.
Well, and that's the thing. There's nothing to whatever's left. We say the car, but it's nothing other than, the frame and a mangled up body. There's nothing left of it. I mean, everything else is gone. I mean, there's a Porsche collector. That Porsche collector in Massachusetts has the transaxle for the car, and when the other family has the engine. I mean, what the hell's left? I mean, sure, maybe
Yeah.
seats. I don't even. I think the seats were still in it. I think that the seats. I don't think the steering wheel was, but I think a lot of the interior of the car was still left in when they had it on display. So
Well,
I'm going to say that part of it is still intact somewhere. Wherever.
One of the stories that, and as you were saying, most likely came out of Barris's book, was that two thieves tried to, one tried to steal one of the seats and the other tried to steal the steering wheel, and that both of them ended up injured while trying to steal them. So, it makes sense what you're saying is, he probably came up with the whole thievery thing because the frame itself got stolen. And to me, it seems like it might be logical, even though a little far-fetched, that you may have had a wealthy movie fan who just, hired somebody to steal this car because he wanted a piece of James Dean, who he may have been a fan of.
Sure.
Now, so talking about movies, a lot of people think that there are movies and movie sets that are cursed as well. One of them being The Exorcist. Now, there's some stories, and we wanted to touch base with you on the stories, see if they're roughly similar to what was going on with Little Bastard. That during filming, both Linda Blair and Ellen Burstyn ended up receiving lifelong back injuries, and that there were, there was a fire on set that burned everything but the bedroom scene or set. Is any of that accurate?
Yeah, actually, there is some weirdness that goes along with The Exorcist. I mean, last time I was on, that was our big subject, and I've talked about nothing but The Exorcist for the last 2 months. But I haven't talked much about the movie, and I love talking about the movie because there's so much. There's a wealth of stuff with the movie, but there is some truth to this, and even though most of the people who were involved in the movie, in the making of the movie, including William Friedkin, were not super sold on the idea of the supernatural. Now, he's gone on to do some other things, including a documentary that he did about a real exorcist, but he's never really, believed in, all of the supernatural elements of this story. But when they were making the movie, and one thing you have to do, they filmed a lot of it on location in Georgetown, in Washington. I think all of us probably have seen the movie, including all of the listeners have seen it. But like the bedroom scene, the interiors at the house, that was all a soundstage that was built in Chicago. And the very first thing that happened, or not Chicago, New York, when the very first thing when they were filming or started the filming, the first weird incident that happened was a fire broke out on the set, burned the entire McNeil house set, except for the room that would be Reagan's bedroom on the set. That's the only thing that survived.
Refrigeration units around that? Didn't they have refrigeration units?
Yeah. There's a lot to that. They built a refrigeration unit around it because Friedkin wanted to make sure that it looked realistic because the room was supposed to be ice cold, and he wanted to be able to see the actor's breath. So they built a refrigeration unit around the bedroom set, and kept it at like 30 degrees during the entire filming.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. So, The fire was the first thing. It caused a 2-week delay. During the filming, Max von Sydow, who played Father Marin, he touched down in New York to film his very first scenes, and his brother died unexpectedly in Sweden. He was sick during the filming. The guy that played Burke Dennings, Jack McGowan, who was an Irish actor, died a week after his character was killed by the demon in the movie. Jason Miller, who played Father Karras, his son was run down on an almost empty beach by a motorcyclist during the filming and nearly died. Ellen Burstyn, as you mentioned already, Brian, she had a back injury that lasted her entire life. That scene where she gets slapped by Reagan and she flies backward. She was on a cable and they pulled it too hard. And she flew all the way back against the wall. So the scream that you hear at that point in the movie is real because she was badly hurt by this. On the set, one of the carpenters accidentally cut off his thumb. A lighting technician lost his toe. During the filming, Linda Blair's grandfather died. An assistant cameraman's wife, and he and his wife had a baby that died. The man who refrigerated the set died. A janitor who took care of the building was shot and killed. There were 9 deaths during the course of this movie. Now, that is not normal in the set of any movie. So things got so bad that Friedkin decided to bring in Jesuit priests to bless the set. And everybody, all the entire cast and crew was there for the ceremony. And they said that that seemed to do the trick. They didn't have any more problems during the filming, but during the post-production stuff, they had all kinds of weird events and odd coincidences that happened. He said that there were several times when they had like these weird double exposures that showed up on the film that he couldn't explain, didn't know why they were happening, but they kept showing up in the film. And then when the movie opened, of course, I mean, we've seen a lot of those, the stories, the clips, the newspaper interviews about people fainting and vomiting in the theater. And, a lot of that stuff was, I think, publicity stunts, selling tickets and handing out barf bags. I mean, come on.
Also,
that's a stunt.
Yeah.
But on the other hand,
but also too, during that time, it did test a lot of folks' beliefs that, that they did kind of wig out on, not as much as they say. No, but I wouldn't be surprised if there weren't people falling out.
There was kind of a double reaction to that movie. A lot of people saw it as nothing more than Catholic propaganda. It was a way to get people back into pews. And I think it probably worked in that way. And for a lot of people, that's how they saw it. They saw this in this particular film. They saw, superstition triumphing over science. They took Reagan in. They took her to see a psychiatrist. They took her to a hospital. Couldn't find anything wrong with her. And then, of course, the priests show up and, save the day. But that's a wrong take to, I could talk about this for hours. But honestly, that's kind of a wrong way to approach it, too, because you'll notice that in reality, in the film, the exorcism fails. The demon kills Father Marin. It wasn't until Father Karras decided to take a leap of faith of his own that the girl was saved. So, I mean, you could look at it in lots of different ways. Now, a lot of people saw it, of course, the non-Catholics saw it as evil. There's that famous quote by Billy Graham about how, God's best friend there, Billy Graham, about how, there's evil itself ingrained in the actual film itself. I mean, come on, and so people, it really divided people, but it became, this huge sensation and remains, I think, still one of the scariest films ever made. And there's a lot of things to talk about.
The scariest part of that film was for me?
What?
It was the part that they removed and then they put it back in. It's that spider walk.
Yeah.
That was weird.
That is creepy.
Yeah, I agree with you. It is freaky.
Yeah.
Totally.
So I'm curious. One of the things I read, and you didn't mention it, so I have a feeling it probably may not have been true.
I could have skipped over it. You never know.
Well, yeah, it's possible, I guess.
No, not you.
Was it one of the actors? He had a bit part. He played a nurse that supposedly just before the film was released, he actually murdered a reporter.
Well, no. There's actually, I actually wrote an article about that, and I didn't include it because it's complex. It's a pretty long story. But
Okay.
he was actually worked at the hospital. He was an anesthesiologist, and when Friedkin went to the hospital to see, I'm sure you all remember the scene when Reagan goes to the hospital and they are running tests on her and stuff, and they stick that needle in. To me, that's some of the most terrifying parts of it right there. But
Yeah.
when Friedkin went to the hospital to see how these things were done and was so impressed by the staff, he asked several of the staff members to just be in the film. And one of them was this guy who was the anesthesiologist, who later it turned out that he went to prison for 10 years, but was accused of being a serial killer. Had been murdering gay men around Greenwich Village in New York. And, he maintained his innocence, but he did go to prison for 10 years. So there really is a serial killer in the movie.
Wow.
And I didn't mention it just because it wasn't like part of the curse kind of thing, but that is actually true. And if you watch the film or you see some of the photographs, you see who it is. You see the guy. So he is actually, there is a serial killer in The Exorcist, which again adds another layer of, weirdness to the whole thing.
Yeah, it definitely adds some creep factor.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at this and say, just like I was talking about earlier with these curses, a curse can be created by, in hindsight, by events that happen. But let's be honest, people were freaking out while this was taking place. This wasn't something that they came up with later and said, oh, look at all these coincidences, it must be a curse. People were actually freaking out at the time. So, right. That one's a little harder to blow off. I mean, there are some that aren't, but that one, The Exorcist and The Omen is another one that the stuff that was going on is really strange. I mean, really messed up. And I will tell you, and this not necessarily directly related to the film, of course, but when I was writing The Devil Came to St. Louis the first edition, and this was in like 2005, 2006, I was writing that book. That's the only book that I have ever worked on that while I was working on the book, strange things were happening in my otherwise completely unhaunted office.
That's kind of creepy.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but
a lot of strange things happening during that time.
Troy, we do need to take a quick station identification break, but when we come back, I definitely want to ask you about that.
Sure.
So everybody hold on until after the break, and we will be back with Troy Taylor.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... nope. That'll do. Hello. I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Since 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experienced Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
And welcome back to the Full Spectrum Project on WBHM-DB out of Birmingham, Alabama. If you haven't already joined the chat room, please go to WBHM-DB.com and click on the Full Spectrum Project show banner. And if you have any questions you would like to call in for our guest or the hosts, you can call into area code 205-533-7982. And when we left for the break, we were talking to Troy about the book he was writing dealing with The Exorcist and how strange things, I guess, started happening around you as you were writing the book. Is that about sum it up?
Yeah, I mean, I was working on, and as we talked about in our last time I was with you guys, we were talking about The Devil Came to St. Louis, which is the book that I had written about the real story that The Exorcist is based on. Right. And as I said, that was the first time, and of all the books I've written over the years, that's been the only time that I've ever had any weird experiences with the writing. I mean, I've had plenty of weird experiences over the years, but not in my own office normally. That's not normal. But it's the only time that I'd ever had things go missing in the office when no one had been there. Things were moved around. I'd find things in other places. I had computer problems. I had electrical problems. And it's, and yes, we could look at it and say, well, you're creeping yourself out working on a book about, demonic things and exorcism and possession and things. So you're creeping yourself out. And so every little thing that happens, you're building it up in your head. So there's my logical explanation
don't
for
forget
it.
Don't forget too, though, you've got cats, and you know how they like to bat stuff off.
Well, I didn't then. This has been quite a while ago. When I wrote the first edition of that, we were talking about 15 years ago.
Wow, has it been that long ago?
Yeah, it's been that long since the first edition came out. So yeah, it was just one of those things that, again, I can write it off and say, logically speaking, that I created that in my head. But on the other hand, I've never had that happen any other time since then. It had never happened before, and it hasn't happened since. And when I first wrote some of my very first books, I lived in a haunted house. So, I mean, the house itself was haunted. But, with that one, it definitely wasn't. And so I don't have an easy explanation for that, other than I think that, by paying attention to that kind of thing, we sort of invite it. And I don't mean that, I took a chance on being possessed by writing. Right. I don't mean that. I just think that sometimes when you mess with stuff like that it realizes that you're there.
Troy,
I don't believe in what demons and what the church considers demons. I think demons is just another word for, different kinds of spirits, but that we've given a really bad label to that now is staple on bad television.
I'm a big demon guy myself.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get into all of that, but my point is that, maybe when you pay attention to it pays attention to you.
In other words, they're keeping an eye on you to see exactly what you're doing.
Exactly. So, I don't know. That's just an out there kind of, statement, I guess, but it's weird. It was weird. And that's the first time that anything like that has ever happened. So it made it easier for me to believe that the cast and crew during the filming of that, where they could certainly see that as something, messing with them, something negative messing with them, and whether or not they're, as a group, they created their own curse. I don't know, but there was something going on because too many people who are not part of our community were experiencing it.
Right. Well, you mean kind of like a group conscious thing that?
Well, I mean, I
all of their concerns.
I'm trying to give you every explanation I can think of that doesn't have anything to do with demons. I'd rather avoid that if I can. So,
well,
so there you go.
There's another film that deals with. Now, not necessarily demons, but this one would have to deal with the son of Satan himself. And I'm speaking about The Omen.
Sure.
And I don't know whether it's true or not, but I had read that the creator of the film, and I'm sorry I can't remember his name, was actually worried about doing a movie that had to do with the Antichrist, and had actually told the crew that he expected the film shoot to be cursed and have weird things happen. Had you heard anything?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Similar
absolutely.
to that.
This the Omen is an odd kind of movie because it came at the tail end of this huge resurgence and interest in the devil and demonic stuff that started with Rosemary's Baby, and this was kind of the other end of the line with, again, the son of the devil. But what's funny about The Omen, and what is always going to be funny about The Omen, is it's a really good movie, and it's not
it is a good movie.
Not a cheerful film by any means, but it is it is a really good movie. And one of the really cool things about the Omen for me, as someone who's not a fan of organized religion, especially fundamentalist religion, everything that comes out, everything that most churches preach about the Antichrist does not come from the Bible. It comes from The Omen. I swear to God. I'm not making this up. I mean, I did an entire book on religion in America called Taking Up Serpents, and I delve into this very deeply in the book, that the Antichrist is only mentioned just a couple of times in the Bible with no detail. Everything everybody knows, including like 666 on your head and all that shit, comes right out of this movie. So that I find funny. But here's the thing. Maybe because of that, maybe that's why this movie had so many weird things. Now, the guy that you were talking about, Brian, his name was Robert Munger, and he was the guy who conceived of the movie, and he was very religious. He was like a devout Christian, and the producers on this, Harvey Bernhard, Mace Neufeld, were the producers, and he had, they'd seen the money that could be made from this thing, but so they were into it because it was a job, it was good money. This guy was into it because he wanted to really get the word out, but he did tell them when they started, and this is a quote: "The devil's greatest single weapon is to be invisible. And you're going to take off his cloak of invisibility to millions of people." And that's why he got so nervous about making this movie. And I got to tell you, again, this is, like The Exorcist, this is the one that I think is probably the freakiest one of the stuff that happens. Because as soon as they started getting the production together, they had already scored pretty big getting Gregory Peck to play Robert Thorne. I mean, Peck, it's Atticus Finch, and he's going to be in a horror film, which was not normal. But anyway, as soon as he landed the role, right after that, his son committed suicide. Ouch. And he decided to keep on with the filming. And in October of 1975, he was on his way to England and almost didn't make it because a storm came up as his plane was flying across the Atlantic, and it was struck twice by lightning. And the engine caught on fire and almost went down over the Atlantic. And then a few days later, when Mace Neufeld was on his way to England, his plane also got struck by lightning. Jesus. So 2 planes, both struck by lightning. I mean, what are the chances? I mean,
now,
seriously.
Troy, I have a question about that, because with one of the things that I read,
statistically, that's impossible, I would say.
Anyway, what I read seemed a little bit far-fetched to me. That it actually supposedly happened just before Peck's plane got hit by the lightning. That he was supposed to have gotten on an airplane, but decided not to go, and that airplane actually crashed, killing everybody on the plane, as well as crashing into the pilot's family's car, killing his family. Now, that's why. Did that happen? No.
A version of that did. Something close to that actually did happen. Because there were some shots that were planned for the film that were supposed to be aerial shots over London, and they had rented a plane. And at the last minute, the rental company swapped planes, and they gave the production crew's original plane to a group of Japanese businessmen. And that plane then crashed and hit the car of the pilot that was flying the production crew's plane.
Jesus.
He was supposed to be
Wow.
flying the Japanese businessman. So at the last minute, they switched it. So that's not completely far off, but it is. It didn't involve Gregory Peck. I mean, his plane was hit by lightning twice. That was bad enough.
Yeah, so
but
it was basically sensationalized to add stuff to make it seem
yes,
more.
but
yeah.
What really happen's bad enough. But that's where the stories of the crew and the cast all started talking about weird things going on and the devil at work. And in fact, Harvey Bernhardt, who was not the Christian, was the one who said that the devil was at work and didn't want the picture to be made. Gregory Peck was at one point, you remember the Rottweilers that are in the movie. He got attacked by them. They were highly trained and they were not supposed to they were supposed to go after a stuntman, and they almost attacked Gregory Peck and ended up attacking another stuntman instead, and nearly killed him. And then there was an animal expert from London who was, he was a big cat wrangler. They were going to shoot that scene. They were going to go to the zoo and take Damien to the zoo, and the cat was supposed to go crazy. The tiger was, but instead the tiger ended up killing the animal wrangler, and they changed it to baboons. You remember attacking the car instead. They changed it to a drive-through zoo because of what had happened. Then there's also, everybody remembers that stunt where where Keith Jennings, the photographer, David Warner, his head gets severed by a piece of glass that flies off a truck. Well, just a few months after that, the same guy, the special effects guy, John Richardson, who set that up, was on another film set in Holland and was in a car accident, and a plate of glass severed his head. Just like God. Omen. Yeah. It's weird stuff, man. I mean, really weird. And to make things even worse, they were in London during the filming. Mace Newfield was staying at the Hilton in London, and it was blown up by an IRA bomb. Remember the 70s? The IRA was blowing up a lot of stuff in London, and they blew up the hotel that he was staying at. And then a couple of days later, he and Newfield he and Harvey Bernhardt and some other film executives were on their way to a restaurant that was nearby, and that blew up too.
Wow.
So that guy narrowly missed being blown up twice.
All right, I think I would definitely call it a day.
Yeah, I know. So
now,
I mean,
let me ask you something.
Sure.
You have two films, one dealing with the demon Pazuzu possessing a child,
right?
And then you have another film dealing with the son of Satan. Do you think that the weird things that were happening have a direct result to, and whether you believe in Satan or the fallen angels or whatever, do you think it could have a direct result and connection to those two evil entities because of the subject matter?
Well, I mean, I think that you're messing with negative energy for sure. I mean, it's out there. Whether you believe in demons or not. And, like I said, I mentioned earlier, I don't necessarily believe in demons by that name, but I certainly believe in negative and diabolical even entities or spirits, which I think, I mean, we could get into a huge long conversation about that. But I think that doing things like this can tap into that for sure. I don't see any reason why not. I mean, if you can tap into good energy, why not bad?
Coming on.
What's that,
I sense another interview coming on.
Yeah, there you go. But unfortunately,
that's a big hit there, Troy.
Anyway, we're going to have to take a quick break, and then when we come back, we are going to go into our Weird World News segment with Angie Mole. So bear with us, and we will be right back.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, Birmingham, Alabama.
Ladies and gentlemen, and children of all ages, put on your best circus mask, sit back, relax, and listen to the Weird World News with Angie Bowling.
Good evening, y'all.
Hi, Angie. Did Pete just call you a clown?
Yeah, possibly.
No, I did not.
Okay, Pete. Yeah, it's okay. It's you Texans. Anyway, hi, Angie.
Hi. All right, let's jump right into this, shall we?
Let us jump.
We're jumping.
We're
A man in South Carolina spent part of his golf game thumbing through the official rule book, trying to find out if he'd be penalized for failing to play it as it lies. The unlucky gentleman made a bad shot, which landed on the back of a 6-foot alligator who was attempting to nap and sun itself on the edge of the water of the golf course. However, his game didn't suffer because the USGA has a couple of different rules that refer to abnormal conditions, immovable obstructions, and dangerous animal conditions, and the alligator definitely falls under that category. This comes only a week after another golfer in South Carolina grabbed an alligator by the tail in an attempt to move it away from his ball. Harassing wildlife is illegal, even if it's holding up your golf game. Now, golfer's in quite a bit of trouble for flirting with death. If he'd consulted the rules, he wouldn't be under investigation by the South Carolina Natural Resources Department. And as many people have pointed out, golf is nothing more than a nice walk ruined by a little white ball.
Well, there is that. By the way, did you know I actually got a hole-in-one once? I'm not kidding. It actually was a hole-in-one. There was only one problem. It wasn't the hole I was aiming at, so it didn't count.
Guys say that a lot.
Oh my God, she did not just go there.
Two families are feeling the full range of emotions today after some crazy events went down at a wedding. 20 years ago, a little girl was lost in China. It's believed that human trafficking was involved, but that part is still kind of unclear. The family was heartbroken and ended up adopting a young boy a short while later. Fast forward to 2021, and that adopted boy is getting married. Imagine the shock when the mother noticed a birthmark on the bride's hand, only to realize that the bride was her long-lost daughter. Turns out the girl was dumped on the side of the road and put up for adoption at some point. She grew up, met the son, and they fell in love. The wedding continued as planned since the bride and groom are not technically related.
I'm curious about something. She found her daughter, but you said that the girl was abandoned on the road at some time. Did they ever arrest the mother?
What they think is that the child was taken for human trafficking, and then either she, whatever the cause is, for them to decide that they don't want to use that person anymore, and they dumped her on the road. And so she was like just some kind of weird orphan kid they found on the street.
It's usually because they get too old, and they look for other children,
right?
Which is upsetting.
Yeah.
Well, so how old was she? Did they say how old she was when she was dumped on the side of the road?
I have no idea how old she was when she was taken, or how old she was when she was adopted. That's not mentioned.
Okay. Sorry, being adopted, I have that whole thing just kind of hits home. So I was just curious.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously I have no idea how the system works over there anyway. And, with it being 20 years ago, I have no idea, beats me.
Right. Yeah. Just thought I'd ask.
There is a new band in town getting some exposure, and you might want to give it a listen. Katera, who blatantly ripped off Pantera's logo, by the way, dropped their first single, Hunger of the Beast. Now, for those of y'all who obviously don't know, I mean, I don't know how many of y'all are on TikTok or whatever, but Katera is actually a heavy metal band made up of cats. Because 2020 keeps going. The front
What?
cat, Roop Shakir, got lucky because he knows people in the music industry, such as Trace Amount. He was able to get some exposure through the Trace Amount YouTube channel, and the first track just kind of came together. So if you want to see, what's his name? Roop Shakir. If you want to see the cat give you a tour of his little cat area, like cribs, then
Angie, did you have something to drink before you got on the show?
no, but I'm sure as heck gonna have one when I'm done.
Yeah, you know what? I'm going to join you because I feel completely ripped off. I mean, I have cats. I have always had cats, and they don't sing. They don't play musical instruments. They don't cut albums. All they do is leave me little prizes in the little dirt boxes, and I feel completely ripped off.
Well, I mean, you should, because cats are disgusting little mooches and they're awful creatures.
Oh, now watch it or I'll bring them over. You don't go there.
All the proceeds from Katera's first single will be donated to the cat rescue Whiskers A Go-Go in Brooklyn. And I am a huge fan of music and fancy myself somewhat of a music critic, but believe me when I say that the first track really just sounds like Roop Shakir's getting his tail smashed in a car door over and over.
Well, I know a few cats that would really get into that. So,
I mean, I can't listen to it. It's like claws on a chalkboard, but
kind of. Hey, at least they didn't rip off the Stray Cats. So,
I mean,
something.
I could get into that, but Steve Quayle.
But by the way, Angie, I'm sorry to cut you off, but that was a perfect story.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I appreciate that. Steve Quayle is a conspiracy theorist and a radio host who is convinced we're on the brink of zombie apocalypse. He also appears to have quite the explanation for why zombies are so angry. It seems as if all the COVID testing is actually covert genetic capture techniques, and all the genetic material collected will be used for a bioweapon that turns us mortal fleshy humans into zombies. It's also
really? Oh,
it's
come
also
on.
important to mention that Quayle believes that zombies are not just diseased humans. Oh no, they're demon-possessed, which explains why they're so bloodthirsty, have no sense of reason or rationale, and want nothing but to destroy.
They're not
because
real.
Of course, that explains it all. Zombies.
You know, I was just thinking, if we want to know anything about zombies, we should probably ask you.
Well, don't ask me, man. They're not real.
So, zombieism can also be attained through drinking the blood of tortured children, which is a common practice among the richest people in the world. Apparently, that's what he says.
So one of those people.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how he knows.
Yeah, no joke.
I'm wondering how he knows about all of this about zombies. Like, where has he ever seen one to know how they behave?
Well, QAnon probably told him about it, would be my guess.
Yeah, there you go.
Right. How long did he study?
Hey, you know what's even scarier than that? They have zombie MREs that you can buy, so you could survive the apocalypse.
Jesus. Isn't that all MREs?
Pretty much. Hey,
Yeah,
you know what?
Aren't they
You
all
would
that?
think.
Really?
You would think.
Some MREs are really not that bad. I used to get them when I would
that's
do a
what
lot
I'm
of
saying,
backpacking.
but they're all to survive any kind of apocalypse. So
Yeah.
that's the
and
point.
by the way, it probably isn't QAnon. It's probably Xenon. I just had to throw
is
that out
something
there.
different? Oh, got it. Took me a second.
So
Yep.
yeah. So anyway, continue, Angie.
Sorry.
So, I mean, I just want to know, like, how long did he study them, to see exactly how irrational they are and full of bloodlust. But this guy proves one thing and one thing only. Any freaky weirdo loser can have a radio show if they have an internet connection.
I mean, that's true.
Oh, wait, hold on.
Or podcast. Yeah.
Dang!
You know what? I am gonna remain completely quiet on this one. So just not.
Really, Troy, you're coming out swinging again.
And that is all I've got for y'all tonight. Thank you for listening to the Weird World News on WBHM-DB, Birmingham, Alabama.
Angie,
yes,
you scare me.
Good.
Just and by the way, I do believe zombies are real. However, they're not what we see on TV. I was reading somewhere that in Haiti,
Yes.
that they actually do have a form of zombieism, but
Yes.
it's due to a drug that if I remember correctly, they get from a fish.
Pufferfish.
Pufferfish. There you go.
Yep.
So
Tetrodotoxin.
There was a movie written on that.
Yep.
I mean, a movie written.
Well,
on that.
there's a book called The Serpent and the Rainbow,
That's
which is
the one.
about the making of the powder, and they did a movie version of it, which is really just a horror film, but it's awesome. It's one of my favorites. I really love it.
Yes,
Wes Craven made it, as a matter of fact. But it is a true story. There really is a poison that can be used mixed with other things so that it doesn't kill you, but puts you into a state of, sort of like zombieism.
Right.
Yeah, and it's there. It kind of came to the forefront because of this guy who had died and then showed up in his village like 13 years after his death. And somehow he had been, fed a steady diet of this poison all those years to keep him under control. But somehow he'd missed enough doses, I guess, that he shook it off and came home. And it's a really interesting story. It really is.
It is.
Yeah, we actually have something similar here in the States. It's called marriage. But,
yeah.
I have a feeling I'm probably not going to survive the night. But
No,
I
hear somebody changing the locks at this point, so you might want to get used to
hopefully my dog likes company. But
hey, Troy, Troy, we were talking about the some of these different curses we were discussing this evening, and you mentioned Rosemary's Baby. Wasn't there supposed to be a curse along with that, or something along those lines?
No. I think that what happens with Rosemary's Baby is that people start. I mean, there's a lot of myths surrounding it. I mean, it's the place, the Dakota where it was filmed. I mean, is a haunted spot. It's where John Lennon died. So there's always going to be a stigma to it. There's also going to be a stigma to it because it's the first or the last movie that Roman Polanski made before Sharon Tate was murdered by the Manson family. So you've always got that tie to it too. And there were, some misfortunes as far as Mia Farrow was served with divorce papers during the filming of the movie. There's a lot of bad stuff that went around it, but really it was Sinatra
at the time?
Yeah, she was married to Sinatra at the time.
Yeah, that's right. Okay.
And but it really kicked off that whole cycle of satanic movies that you started to see in the late 60s and through the mid 70s. It was a precursor to a lot of stuff. Mephisto Waltz, The Exorcist, Devil's Reign,
I forgot about the Mephisto Waltz.
Ride with the Devil. I mean, there was a lot of stuff that came out around that time, a lot more, even a lot smaller films than those that came out around that same time. It really kind of kicked off that whole thing. So, I mean, I look at Rosemary's Baby as what really started like the satanic panic of the late 70s and into the 80s and early 90s, because it was what kicked off this whole cycle of, satanic films to the Devil a Daughter, all that stuff.
You say the satanic panic. There was a book, Michelle remembers that.
Oh God, yeah, that was a big part of it too. Yeah, that played a huge role in it. And listen, I was in high school when that book came out. Actually, I think maybe it was like I was in 8th grade, I think, when that book came out, and I read it. And as a 13-year-old, I thought it was terrifying. It had to be real. Because, it fit with all the movies I was watching at the time, right? But yeah, as the years have gone by, I have really done a lot of exposing on that book, doing a lot of research and debunking it, because it turned out to be a big load of crap. All of that, repressed memory stuff, and and your popular culture fed into it, and mostly it was the talk shows and things. I mean, I don't know if you guys remember it, but there was that Geraldo Rivera special that ran, and you could still find that on YouTube, and it's hilarious now to watch it. But at the time, it seemed scary. It seemed terrifying that there was this, cabal of Satanists across the country who were responsible for, like all the missing persons across the country. And there was another book that came out around that same time called The Ultimate Evil by a guy named Maury Terry, who linked everything from Son of Sam to the Manson family to every missing person and all these murders across the country to this, again, this big. Yeah, well, pretty much. Let's be honest. What it is it was a precursor to QAnon, because it's this secret society of Satanists who are doing all this underhanded stuff. And it's absolutely ridiculous. But there are people who believe that crap, and there it is. And that's exactly what was going on in the 80s. You had the backward records, the music.
Oh, God, I remember all those backward records.
Yeah, I mean, and then you'd have bands that were putting shit on there on purpose because they thought it was funny.
Well, the Beatles were really good at that.
Trying to get people to listen to it backward, because they thought it was hilarious.
Well,
but
you remember the Beatles. The Beatles put a lot of stuff on theirs as a marketing point.
Yeah, I think there was some of that. I think there was some of that, but some of the guys were like, doing it on purpose. And I don't know if the Beatles, if theirs was on purpose or people read it into that, because if you remember correctly, a lot of the messages that people claim they heard on Beatles albums were about how Paul had died in a car accident.
Yeah,
right.
With the look-alike, remember? So, which obviously
there's a documentary out there that talks about that, where it's up and down.
I know it, man.
I was watching that and I'm like, nah, really? If people believe this?
What I get a kick out of is, Paul McCartney even said that the reason he was barefoot was just to mess with people.
Yeah.
He said that it had absolutely nothing to do with anything.
Yeah.
And he was just like, you know what? I'm going to take my shoes off. And he did. There was no message behind it. And then it just sort of took on a life of its own on how Paul was dead. And I mean, it was just one of those things that
entire books, magazines, documentaries, all this stuff. I mean, about how it's a lookalike. That's the reason the Beatles really broke up. And I mean, but that's, it's all out of that same mindset of, there's got to be, and it gets right back into this curse thing that there has to be a big conspiracy behind everything.
Well, one of the things that I find so amusing nowadays is the fact that people are still, thinking that the Church of Satan and Satanism is all, behind the scenes, and all they have to do is open their eyes and realize they're out there in the open.
But you got to understand though, the Church of Satan, they're not devil worshipers,
right?
I mean, they are. Their motto thing is that, do whatever you want as long as you don't hurt anybody. They're atheists. They don't believe in any, as they call them, cartoon characters that, churches of every kind, including even devil worshipers, worship. They don't see Satan as a real individual. It's a symbol. It's all a symbol. And that's all it has ever been. It's the people who really believe in that stuff. And they're out there. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. Those people are out there. They're the ones that are scary, but they're a very small minority to all this stuff. The Church of Satan is not, I mean, they're the boogeyman to all of these, churches and religious people, but they're not anything that you need to worry about.
Right.
In fact, I find Catholic priests and young boys a lot scarier than anything the Church of Satan has ever done.
And what I get a kick out of is movies are still using the Church of Satan as, like you said, the boogeyman in movies and things like that. One of the other, and you had mentioned it when we were off air, another movie that a lot of people, or actually not a movie, but a trilogy that people think have a curse attached is the movie Poltergeist. And I think a lot of that has to do with, like what you were saying off air, that there was just a set of circumstances that happened. Can you
4 sad deaths, out of 2 movies, the entire cast, 4 people died under sad circumstances, and only 2 of them being unexpected, 2 of them not really unexpected, and because the way that they happened. I mean, I think that most people know that Heather O'Rourke, who played Carol Ann, died very young. She had a lot of issues. She had Crohn's disease. She had a problem with her, she had a bowel obstruction. She had a congenital anomaly in her intestines, and she never really grew. I mean, she always stayed very small.
Well, I think didn't she die because of the bowel obstruction?
Yes.
They were doing surgery on her, and she ended up getting septic.
Mm-hmm. That is exactly right. So, I mean, her death was unexpected. She was young. She was very young. She was 12, I think, when she died. So, I mean, more unexpected and worse was, in the first film, Dominic Dunn, who played Dana, the older sister, was, murdered, beaten to death and murdered by her, boyfriend that she'd been separated from. And that was a shock. I mean, that was a big surprise. But, again, out of all the people that are in the movies, you've had two die within, Dominic Dunn died in 1982, and I think Heather O'Rourke died in 1988, I believe. So I mean, they're separated by a number of years.
Yeah, it wasn't too long after the third movies when she passed.
Right, exactly.
Or was it towards the wrap up of that?
Right, and the other two people that died were during the after the filming of Poltergeist 2, and one of them was Julian Beck, who played the very, very scary preacher in that Kane. I mean, he had stomach cancer. He died.
That guy, I swear, is one of the creepiest human beings alive, or who was alive.
And it really, that movie isn't that great, but he makes it so good.
He definitely does. Yes.
When he walked up to him, God is in his holy chapel. I'm like,
dude.
I
know, man. I know it. Well, and Will Sampson died shortly after it was made too. He played Taylor, the native, the shaman, and I like that. I really like that. He was a great actor. He was in a lot of great stuff, and he was undergoing.
He in Cuckoo's Nest?
Yeah, that's him. Yeah, he's the chief in Cuckoo's Nest. Yeah, he was undergoing a heart-lung transplant, and they didn't think he'd make it, so it wasn't a surprise. It's sad, yes, but not a surprise. And people have lumped this all together and said, it's 3 movies. You've got a cast and crew in the hundreds, and yes, 4 people who were in the films died, but I don't think that makes it cursed. This is something that has been dreamed up in more recent times, and they want to put. They've talked about other stuff too. I mean, the big thing that I've heard quite a bit about is that in the first movie when Joanne.
The skeletons.
The skeletons in the swimming pool. When she falls into the swimming pool and the skeletons come out, they used real skeletons. Well, the reason they did that is because they were so much cheaper than plastic ones. I know that sounds gross, but you can get them really cheap from India, so that's what they did. And, these were bodies or skeletons that had been donated to science. It wasn't like they were going out and stealing them from graveyards. I mean, it was a legitimate purchase. Right. So, and I get that freaks people out, but on the other hand, it certainly has nothing to do with a curse.
Well, one thing too is
that's a sad one.
Dominic Dunn was the only one that was really a shock. I mean, Will Sampson, he had medical issues. Heather O'Rourke had medical issues, and Julian Beck had been fighting stomach cancer.
Yeah.
So, none of the deaths other than Dominique Dunn's was really a shocker.
Right.
With Heather O'Rourke, I think it was just because of the fact that she was 12 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
well, and I think everybody knew something was wrong because by the third film, several years had passed and she was still the same size she'd been in the first one. So I think people knew that
she also looked bloated too.
She did. She looked a little, like maybe there was something wrong growth wise, and I don't think anybody was surprised to hear that she'd had health issues.
Yeah. One of the things that I get a kick out of is it is now spilling over to the remake. You now have people, trying to come up with stories that the remake itself, that the curse had attached to that. But when you look at it, there was nothing really that ever happened with, the remake.
No.
But people are still trying to attach the curse to it, which I find a little.
They're remaking The Exorcist too, so I'm wondering how they're going to tie.
Well, that's not. I don't think that's going to be a remake. I think it's some kind of sequel, is my understanding. So.
Oh, okay.
Well, hopefully it's better than the other sequels, because those were just horrendously bad.
Well, the third one is interesting.
What, the Exorcist 3? The Exorcist 3, when they it's a serial killer or something.
Yeah, that one, and that one's not bad. Mostly because you got George C. Scott, so you can't, you're not talking a total loss there, and there's some scary moments. But the second one we shouldn't even talk about.
Yeah, no, that one.
Oh man.
My God! When they sat her down on that table to get her down to her, was it Burt Lancaster? Was that what it was? It was in that movie.
Richard Burton in the second.
Richard Burton. Oh my God! That was that. Oh
yeah.
There was
a situation.
Talk about a dragging movie. That was the worst one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the special effects in it looked like it was done by a 3-year-old on a Apple, or one of those old computers, Commodore 64 or something. Yeah. I mean, it was just horrendously bad.
Christmas lights.
Yeah, it's a bad movie.
Yeah, that's sort of an understatement. Yeah, it just seems like Hollywood has run out of ideas.
Oh, I don't know, man. I don't know. But I know what you're saying. I definitely get what you're saying. I'm not a guy, I don't go around talking about how much I hate remakes, because sometimes they can be great. I will give you the Evil Dead 2013 version, or Dawn of the Dead, Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead. I mean, sometimes remakes can be fantastic, but I don't see why we have to have quite so many when there are still plenty of good ideas out there. I think it's cheap, and I think it's lazy, So
yeah, I definitely agree with you. So, just out of curiosity, why do you think so many films have curses attached to them? What is it about the films that people just want to, say, "Oh, look, there's a curse"?
Okay, well here's the thing.
Troy, let me add to that. The Twilight Zone, isn't that supposed to be a curse?
Yeah, and again, I think that falls into the same thing as the poltergeist thing. That's you can't look at that as a curse. All you can do is look at that and say that was a terrible thing that happened.
Absolutely,
that was a lot of bad planning went into that. I don't think anybody did anything criminally negligent or even accidental. I just think somebody really screwed up, and it was a bad idea. And, you ended up with Vic Morrow and 2 young kids killed, not murdered, but killed.
Right.
And it was a really, really unfortunate situation. But I certainly wouldn't say that it was a curse, because there's nothing else you can attach to that movie. Most of the time I find that, and here we're going to go back and answer that question, is that the reason that people do this, I mean, you don't talk about how, I'm not going to say this particular one, but there are lots and lots of movies where people die. Not only cast members of natural causes, crew members on natural causes, but, accidents happen. You do hear about accidents occurring in different films.
Right.
But you don't talk about the curse of When Harry Met Sally. You know what I mean? Every time you hear about a curse, it's always about a horror film. Always. Right. There's never, it's no other genre invites that, because, horror films are dealing with stuff that scares us. And what's scarier than the idea that we could fall victim to something that is out of our control, like theoretically a curse would be? Even though I know we talked about it early on, and I think we all agree that a curse is something that you normally, not always, but 9 times out of 10, you bring it on yourself. You create it and you manifest it even and make it happen. We were talking about zombies earlier. Well, voodoo, which is linked to zombies, that's most famous for the kind of sympathetic magic that we're talking about here is, people believing in these curses, people believing that they have been poisoned and now they're no longer under their own bodily control. They're now zombies and their will has been taken from them, or a family member's will has been taken from them. It's easy to believe depending on the circumstance that you're in. And horror films make it easier for us to believe that they could be cursed, because you're dealing with something, inherently negative. I mean, there aren't very many happy horror films, I mean, I don't think there are probably any. So you're always dealing with horrific things and negative things. And it's easy to believe that something would be cursed because, people are asking for it, so to speak. It's just kind of like when I tell people that strange things started to happen when I, was working on this book about the story behind The Exorcist. And people are like, well, what do you expect? I mean, you're asking for it by doing stuff like that. And a lot of people see it that way. And I think probably all of us kind of see it that way in our heads a little bit, no matter what you might believe. And I just did an interview a couple of weeks ago, and I had somebody ask me about Ouija boards. We were doing like a Zoom session, and I, had some on the wall behind me, and were asking me about them. And, I don't think Ouija boards are anything. I mean, to me, they're an antique that are cool. They're really cool pieces of old art. Right. But there are a lot of people who believe that they are something malevolent. Well, the reason they believe that is because they brought that on themselves. And things like that are what you make of them, whether it be a curse or a Ouija board. Or whatever.
The thing I get a kick out of the Ouija board is the fact that it came basically the evil witch board came from one Baptist minister in Hollywood, and and everybody just fell into the Ouija board is evil. But then when I tell people that, okay, well, if the Ouija board is evil, that means that a digital recorder, that means demons are afraid of batteries because it's basically the same darn thing.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's all in what kind of focus you put about them. And, like you said, a Baptist minister started it somewhere, but, the stories have been around for a long time. I mean, I found a lot of old newspaper stories that date back to the turn of the last century talking about negative things that have happened with people using Ouija boards. And that, it all spins out of, it was designed to be a way to talk to spirits at a time when spiritualism was still a part of our culture. Right. And so to anybody who was opposed to talking to spirits, then obviously that was evil, so it's, it's had a bad connotation ever since. And periodically we'll have, pop culture, the people would be amazed in the effect that pop culture has on our belief systems in this country. But, pop culture comes along with a movie like, Witchboard with Tawny Katane in the 80s, oh my God, Ouija boards are evil, and then a couple of years ago we had the Ouija movies, Ouija, the beginning and all that stuff. And periodically they still come out. The biggest culprit to, Ouija boards are evil is The Exorcist, because it implies in the movie,
Captain Howdy. Yep.
Yeah. It implies that Reagan becomes possessed because of the Ouija board. Now, this isn't the case. And obviously it's not the case, because the demon is an old enemy of Father Marin's, who is using her to lure him into the exorcism. I mean, that's what it's about.
Yeah, and basically finish what he started.
Right, but it looks like the Ouija board had something to do with it, because that was a thing at the time. In the late 60s, early 70s, the country was going through a big surge in interest in the occult, that it hadn't seen in a while. We'd come out of the 50s with UFOs and, robots and giant monsters and things, and people weren't talking about, even ghosts so much as or the occult. And then by the 60s, times had changed. And so Rosemary's Baby comes along and all this other stuff. And so that made a good foil for this, because one of the things I've had to combat quite a bit with the real story that inspired The Exorcist was that the boy who was the real victim of the possession, the story goes is that he was using a Ouija board trying to talk to his dead aunt, and that's why he became possessed. But that's not even true. The real story is she was not a spiritualist. She'd never given him a Ouija board. He never used it, and she didn't die until 2 weeks after the events in his home began. So, none of that is true. But in this case, fiction, as in the Exorcist movie, has influenced the real story. So people think that's true. Here's one of the things that I get a kick out of, and I don't think anybody has ever actually, well, I'm sure there's some people, but in the real Exorcist case, the priests win. Okay. In the movie,
most people don't even realize that the demon won.
Right.
And
Well, until the very end, when Father Karras, the exorcism fails in the movie.
Right. And that's what I mean.
Karras asks the demon to come into him, and then he gets absolution at the end.
Right. So the demon actually got what he wanted. He managed to kill Father Merrin.
Mm-hmm.
And then as a bonus, he managed to get Father Karras to become possessed and kill himself.
Right.
So in effect,
except that, because it was a sacrifice that he made, he could be absolved because he saved Reagan's life. So, I mean, technically there should be no sequels.
It was basically a tie.
There should be no sequels to this story because it has a good ending in that Father Karras, this priest who had lost all of his faith in everything,
regained his faith
until
at
that
the
point
end.
Had been a bystander in the exorcism for the most part because he, his faith had failed him. He'd seen what happened to his mother, he'd seen humanity, and he just didn't believe. And then when Father Merrin died, he stepped in. He took a leap of faith. The demon came into him. He threw himself out the window, destroyed the demon, and then his friend absolved him of his sins. So technically, it has a happy ending in that, we've gotten rid of the demon and, et cetera. But yeah, you're right. In that particular case, not only did medicine fail, psychiatry failed, and the church failed too in this story. So you're absolutely right about that.
Yeah, I just always, that was one thing that always kind of hit me, and I actually remember it from a young age. But now, so we touched on movies having curses, and we kind of touched on why, horror movies. But movies aren't the only form of media where curses have been attached.
No.
Musicians and music halls also have their fair share. And one of them, which actually kind of surprised me because I really had never heard about the curse of Buddy Holly. This is one I was hoping that we could discuss.
Sure.
Can you kind of fill us in on?
Yeah, I can. But I will tell you that this is one of those curses that got started long after Buddy Holly died. And it seemed that all of these different people attached to or connected to Buddy Holly in some way died these violent deaths. And I got to tell you, musicians are even more superstitious than actors are. So It's not surprising when you hear about the different curses. But this one is, while I have an extensive chapter on it in my book, it's silly. It really is silly. I mean, it's not silly to know that Buddy Holly died the way that he did. And there are, other connections to, I would even say the paranormal connected to Buddy Holly's death and the Big Bopper's death and Richie Valens' death, including that all of them dreamed before they died that they would die in a terrible way. Especially Richie Valens, who was terrified of flying because when he had been a kid, we've probably all seen La Bamba. So we remember that he had a good friend who died on a playground when a plane crashed and it killed his friend. And Richie was supposed to be there that day and his friend died and he probably would have been there playing with his friend. So he was terrified of flying. So it was kind of ironic whenever he, died in a plane crash. I mean, it was not, I wouldn't call it paranormal or supernatural, but there were lots of stories that came out after Buddy died about, there had been a friend of his, a producer in England that he had worked with, who had shortly before Buddy had died, had been having a seance at his house. They had a Ouija board out and they were having a seance, and they were somehow a warning came through for Buddy Holly that that something connected to it would be February 3rd. And February 3rd was followed by Buddy Holly dies. And his buddy, now keep in mind, again, this is a story told after, but his friend supposedly was in a panic trying to get a hold of Buddy, but couldn't get a hold of him. And in 1958 is when this happened. He couldn't get a hold of him, but February 3rd came and went. Buddy didn't die. And so he thought, oh, good. It was just a weird fluke. It was just a coincidence that it occurred that way. And then, of course, February the 3rd rolls around in 1959 and Buddy dies in a plane crash. So there was that story. There were other people connected to Buddy, like Eddie Cochran, who was a good friend of his. He and Gene Vincent had toured with Buddy. They were friends, and Eddie had, put together a song about, Buddy and Richie and the Big Bopper. And there were lots of connections between them. And then they were in a terrible car crash, and Eddie was killed during the car crash. So, a lot of people connected him to Buddy Holly, that he died. And, there were other people that were parts of the Crickets that had died, that were part of the backup band. There was a guy that the surviving Crickets, a young guy, they had kind of picked him to continue on. His name was David Box, and he was 17, and he was a Texas kid. And they wanted him to carry on for Buddy and, continue to sing the songs and tour with him and stuff. And then he was on his way to a show in Texas in a small plane, and it crashed. And so he died. So this kind of stuff kept going for a while. Bobby Fuller was another musician from the same time period that we had a connection. His connection to Buddy was that they had known each other, and in fact, Buddy Holly's parents had introduced him to his agent, which, as it turned out, was the same agent that had launched Richie Valens's career. And Bobby Fuller, if you don't know the story, it's the guy that wrote I Fought the Law and the Law Won. In 1966, he was murdered. His body was found in his car in California, parked in front of his mother's house, and it's never been solved. So there's that, and people have linked that to the Buddy Holly curse. And then after that, it starts getting weaker and weaker as things go on. I mean, there are people like Keith Moon goes to see a Buddy Holly movie and then overdoses that night, that kind of stuff. Ricky Nelson, who again, star from the same time period as Buddy, was big in the 80s. He was kind of making a comeback. And the night that he died in a plane crash, he had closed out his set with a bunch of Buddy Holly songs and then died in a plane crash. Del Shannon was another one. He committed suicide, but the night before he died, he had played not only at some Buddy Holly stuff, they were doing a revival tour that was going on, but he'd actually played at the Surf Ballroom where Buddy and Richie and the Big Bopper had played, and then died on February 3rd, 1990. That was the same, the anniversary of Buddy's death. So it's, it's a bit of a stretch. It makes an interesting story, but still, there are a lot of the music curses are that way though, unfortunately.
So you had mentioned that Buddy Holly and a couple of other people that had dreams that they were gonna. Yeah. I had read that Buddy Holly's wife also had that same. Yeah. So she had that dream as well.
Yes. Yes.
Now how about the Big Bopper? Did he also have that dream?
He'd had some kind of premonition that had happened before that. He had done. I mean, I don't know if you know much about him, but I mean that was really his only song was Chantilly Lace. I mean, he was really known as a DJ. I mean, that was his main thing. And a couple of years before this had happened, he had done some kind of marathon and had stayed awake and played records for 122 hours, which is over 5 days, which, I mean, he, was taken out in an ambulance when it was over, and he had all these hallucinations. And he said that he foresaw his own death during that time. Now, of course, it could have been a hallucination, but that's something he said at the time that this happened. So, I mean, it wasn't like he just made it up out of the blue. I mean, people heard him say it, that he foresaw his death was coming soon. And there's no reason why at that point he didn't even have a hit song. He was just a guy, it was a DJ,
So here's my question. If all of these people had the same dream, why did they attach the curse to Buddy Holly and say not the Big Bopper or
because
Richie
everybody that died afterward that have been linked to this curse were all people that knew Buddy or were connected to Buddy in some way, not to the Big Bopper or Richie. That's why. Plus, Buddy Holly was the most famous of the three, obviously,
Right.
And so it's, when it comes to curses, you want to go for the big time. You want to really attach it to the top stuff,
So, where did the curse or I should say, the myth of the curse actually start? I mean, who started? I mean, it had to have come from somewhere.
Yeah, that's a good question. There were so many stories that went around after they died, with Waylon Jennings and the coin flip with him and Richie, who was going to get to ride. And Waylon Jennings retold that story. He was a drummer and was backing up the band, for the guys. And they were on this tour bus, and the bus was old and it was leaking and it was cold, and all of them had colds and were sick, and nobody wanted to ride the bus. And there were only 3 seats on the plane. And so they flipped a coin. Richie and Waylon Jennings flipped a coin, and Richie won the coin toss. And, he told that story over and over, as being this fluke, something that happened to him. And then, after he died, there were the stories about Maria Elena, who was Buddy Holly's wife, having this dream of, Buddy falling out of the sky. And then there were the stories about the producer and the Ouija board and all that stuff. And, I think this stuff went around for so long that people just started to talk. And Eddie Cochran was really the first person to die in the wake of this. It was, he wasn't a huge, he was successul, but he wasn't as big as Buddy Holly. He was Richie Valens level, a lot of hit songs.
Troy, I'm sorry.
We
went over our break, so we're going to take it now. My apologies for that.
Okay.
But
you didn't stop me, so I kept talking.
So. You know what? I was completely into what you were saying. So, I definitely have the blame for this one, not you. So we will be back with Troy Taylor as soon as we're done with the break.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... Nope. That'll do. Hello. I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
This is Jason Bland, host of Midwest Paranormal Presents Paranormal Soup, where we stream live as a webcast every Sunday night, 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. Eastern, with guests who will blow your mind. Live ghost box sessions where you can call into the show to see if the spirits will talk to you, and the World Wide Web of Weird with the latest in paranormal news and evidence. We're bringing the weird every Sunday night, 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. Eastern on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. Don't forget to follow and subscribe.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio. Broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Thank you for listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 45 minutes after the hour.
And welcome back to the Full Spectrum Project on WBHM-DB out of Birmingham, Alabama. We still have a few minutes. If you want to jump into the chat room, go to WBHM-DB.com, click on the Full Spectrum Project show banner, and that will take you to the chat room. And if you would like to call in with questions for our guest or the hosts, you can call into area code 205-533-7982.
I triple dog anybody to call us.
Yeah.
Do what?
He triple
I
dog
triple
dares us.
dog dare anybody to call us.
Okay, so Troy, with the few minutes that we have left, why don't we talk about the Ryman Hall? I know that one is kind of extensive, but if you can kind of fill us in on the Grand Ole Opry and the curse involved with it.
Yeah. You know, what's interesting in the Grand Ole Opry, we all have heard of it. We all know about it. The Grand Ole Opry is not a place. The Grand Ole Opry is a thing. And it can be anywhere because at first it was. When it first started airing on the radio in the 1920s, it was just a barn dance, and it was on different stations, and they called it Grand Ole Opry, and it was where they started gathering what was then a fairly new musical genre of country western music, and people started to play and perform out of whatever radio stations they were at. It wasn't until 1943 that it moved to the Ryman Auditorium, and it seems that that's the time when what became known as the Grand Ole Opry curse really started to kind of take off, and it has affected so many people over the years. And, you know, it can be, as we've talked about, and we just mentioned off the air, that, you know, so many of these performers back in the 50s and 60s were traveling in these little planes, and, you know, which could be dangerous. You know, there was a lot of drugs, a lot of alcohol involved, and you've got the same thing. I mean, just because it was country music, it was no different than rock and roll. Right. A lot of these people were heavy drinkers, you know, lived fast, lived dangerously, and a lot of them got into a lot of trouble. So it's not surprising when you find how many deaths there are, but, well, maybe a little bit, because there is an inordinate number of deaths all connected to people that were playing for the Grand Ole Opry at the Ryman Auditorium. I found that seems to be the link, because once the Opry moved to Opryland, into a new location and stopped using the Ryman for most of their performances, the curse just seemed to kind of drop off. But they moved there in 43, and within a few years, the first death occurred. And of course, that was Hank Williams, which I think I briefly mentioned that earlier. And, you know, we all know, I mean, anybody who knows anything about Hank Williams knows that he was a heavy drinker and, but died very young, much younger than he probably should have. And there has always been a little bit of an oddity about his death, as far as some people believe that, you know, he committed suicide. Some people believe he just drank himself to death. There are even people who think he was murdered. I mean, that's always going to be there with a lot of these people. There's always going to be a suspicion. The bigger the star, the stranger it is. Well, but
now weren't there pills involved with Hank Williams' death?
There's a lot of stuff involved with Hank Williams. Yeah. He had a lot of stuff going on. You know, and again, just because you're a country singer doesn't make you any less susceptible to, you know, the drugs and alcohol that come with show business. You know, we always want to push that off on the rockers, you know, and the druggies and everything. But country music was just as bad, you know, especially then at the time.
I mean, look, you know, we're looking at all of this, you know, their schedules and their performance levels and stuff. You know, I can see why they would self-medicate to try to keep themselves up to perform.
Yeah, no, me too.
You know, whether I agree with it or disagree with it, I mean, you would have to say that would be a lot of it.
Yeah, you can certainly understand it. So, well, he's always been the one who's been named as the beginning, or at least the first victim of the curse. The second one was Johnny Horton, who wrote the song, the Battle in New Orleans song. I think it's really the only big song he had. But the odd thing was that he was married to Hank Williams' widow. And he had, in 1960, had been playing a couple of shows, was driving to Shreveport, Louisiana with his band when a drunk driver hit their truck, and Johnny died on his way to the hospital. Next after that was Patsy Cline, who, of course, is one of the biggest stars of the Grand Ole Opry ever. She died in a plane crash, and I think we, are pretty familiar with that story as far as, what happened and, her plane going down. And there were several performers with her on the flight who also died, who were all connected to the Grand Ole Opry.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. She was one of the biggest stars of the Opry. And, when her plane went down and she died, I mean, she almost died a few years before in a bad car accident. And some of people are nowhere familiar with her career. And I dig into it pretty deep because I've always been a fan of hers. But she started wearing her hair differently, started wearing bangs to hide all the scars from the car accident. And then, a couple of years later, she's in this plane that goes down, and, she and band members all died in that. And then it wasn't long after that, Jack Anglin was a Grand Ole Opry performer who died on the way to Patsy's funeral, got into a car accident and was killed on the way there. And then Ruby Agnes Owen, who was Texas Ruby, she was also a very popular performer at the Grand Ole Opry, and she died too. She was asleep in her trailer. She's a heavy smoker, had a cigarette in her hand, set the trailer on fire. She died. Jim Reeves, or Gentleman Jim Reeves, as he was mostly known, was the next one to die. And he, again, in another plane crash. He also died in a plane crash. So there was the Jolly Green Giant, Jack Henry Green. He was killed in an accident. He often played at the Grand Ole Opry. He was in a bus accident. It just went, the list just goes on. And really one of the big ones was String Bean Acom. And you and I talked about him before the show. And he was a performer, very popular performer on not only with the Grand Ole Opry, but on Hee Haw as well. And
anybody would recognize him. He was a real tall gentleman,
real tall,
wore his pants low.
Yeah, and always, that's what I was going to say. Always had his pants low and wore overalls all the time. Yeah. But he and his wife lived in kind of a secluded spot, and he made a lot. But it was a pretty, just a basic country. They were just basic country folks, and they didn't believe in banks and kept all their money at home. Usually he kept a big roll of bills in his overalls, and somebody had heard about it, broke in and decided to rob them and murdered both of them in their home. And that, I think, was really kind of what sent the whole, this thing about this curse really got started after that, as far as people talking about it and linking all these deaths.
Didn't they catch the folks? One of them died in prison, another one was
both
paroled
ended up serving like 99-year sentences in prison. I think both of them died in prison, the two guys that did it.
But let die, because I thought I'd read somewhere that they released one of them.
Yeah, they may have. I know one of them died in prison, but one of them may have gotten out. You're right. I don't remember off the top of my head.
I think he served like 30 years or something like that. They paroled him. I don't know if he's alive or dead now.
Well, let me ask you this. It sounds, and kind of what you said at the beginning of when we started talking about the Grand Ole Opry and Ryman Hall, it sounds more like the Ryman Hall had the curse rather than the Grand Ole Opry.
Yeah, it does. So, it just but they were, but the Ryman had been in operation for years before the Opry came there, and there weren't any deaths connected to it before that.
Well, see, what I'm wondering though is even though the Grand Ole Opry no longer performs at the Ryman Hall, I think it does every once in a while. I think it does every once. As like a throwback type of thing. Yeah. I'm just wondering, since it is still a popular music venue for concerts, and I think they do plays and things like that. Has the curse reared its head after the Grand Ole Opry left?
Not that I'm aware of. Jimmy Widener seems to be the last, and that was in the 70s, and he seems to have been right before they moved to Opryland. He seems to have been the last victim of the curse, and whatever it is, this string of deaths anyway. And there hasn't been anything like that connected to it since. I mean, there have been plenty of country stars that have died or have been in accidents or have had tragedies in their lives, but none of them seem to be linked by anything in particular the way that all of these performers were. And again, you could write that off as a coincidence and just say, well, of course they were all linked by the Grand Ole Opry because that was the most popular thing around at the time. And that was where everybody performed. This is where they got their fame. So again, and I talked about that too. Music curses are a funny thing. They're like any other kind of curse, I guess. They are what you make of them.
Pete, unfortunately, we are out of time.
Alrighty.
Yep.
But Troy, again,
I was just gonna put one on you, Troy.
Okay.
Oh, you know what, Troy?
Great.
You are saved by the bell. Trust me on
apparently.
this one.
Apparently so.
You know Pete, so you were definitely saved by the bell on this one. Anyway, again, it was such a pleasure to have you on. And when you get talking, I mean, it just, people get drawn into what you're saying, and it's just
it's hard to shut me up. That's why. So
you know what, we never want to. I mean, seriously, you are so engaging, and what you your knowledge is just fantastic, that you just literally draw people in to want to listen to what you have to say. But seriously, thank you again so much for being back on. And luckily, Pete, didn't go too far on the dad jokes. We're working on it, and we're hoping that he finally stops doing it. He's getting older. I'm getting older. As a matter of fact, when I was younger, I had to use a used calculator that didn't have the X on it anymore. The X button was gone, and I mean, times were tough. But it's just one of those things. We're working on him, so hopefully.
I'm sorry, Troy, at this point, but okay.
Hopefully, if you come back on, we'll have squared him away.
Yeah.
We're working on him. So, anyway, again, Troy, thank you so much.
Sure thing.
We definitely appreciate you being on.
Yep.
So next week we will be joined by Kenny Biddle, and we're going to be discussing the Dybbuk box, which should be interesting. The Dybbuk box has kind of taken on a whole new meaning with the movie and with a certain TV show that brought it out. So that one should be an interesting show. And I will be doing it from, get a load of this, Texas. I will be in Texas next Thursday. So
me too.
I know, and so will Angie. So until then, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. We couldn't have a show without you, and we do appreciate it. And everybody be safe. Pete?
Thank you for everybody, and look forward to talking to y'all again next week.
Absolutely. So until then, be safe, be happy, and we will see you next week.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk radio.